So good morning, everyone, and welcome to today's leadership event. My name is Mark Snyder. I'm Senior Vice President and Chief Litigation Counsel for Qualcomm. My role today is to get the program started, and then my colleague Kirti Gupta will be guiding you through the rest of the day, through the panels and the various speakers. But before we begin, I wanted to talk a little bit about leadership. Leadership started several years ago in the United States, and we had a number of events in Washington, D.C., where we talked about intellectual property and antitrust policy issues with an emphasis on empirically based policymaking. But leadership has become a platform for objective and balanced discussion on a number of issues facing, in particular, the wireless industry today. And through the gracious support we have of the sponsors of our event today, we've been able to bring this program to Europe. Our sponsors being Competition Policy International, Compass Lexicon, Orange, France Brevet, Ericsson, Nokia, and the law firm of Quinn Emanuel. So I thank them for their gracious support of this event and our being able to bring this to Brussels. And Brussels is particularly important because of Europe's role in the development of the Internet of Things and what we call 5G technologies. I'm not sure that anybody can today put their finger on exactly what 5G and the Internet of Things will look like, but it no doubt will have as profound an impact on our lives as the cellular technologies that we use and that have changed the way we communicate and interact socially throughout the world. Cell phones, for many of us, are the first thing that we pick up in the morning when we wake up and the last thing that we put down before we go to bed. And again, these Internet of Things technologies will involve things like mobile healthcare, connected vehicles, autonomous vehicles, that will have such a completely profound impact in the way that we do things in the future. So it's important that we have these types of discussions to get it right when it comes to innovation policy, intellectual property policy, and antitrust policy. Europe is at the forefront of the development of standardized technologies. It has been for many, many years in the cellular space with the work that's been done with ETSI, and we anticipate that work continuing on within the standards bodies. And of course, the intellectual property and antitrust intersection and overlay with respect to the development of standardized technologies. That work is also going on here in Europe, and it's been an important leader in the development of thinking on intellectual property and antitrust policy. And so with that, this program today, hopefully you will find very helpful as it's targeted to a number of different issues that arise in that context. And now I want to introduce my colleague, Kirti Gupta, who is the Senior Director of Economic Strategy at Qualcomm, and she will introduce the panelists and the panels throughout the rest of the day. Thank you.
Good morning. Welcome to all of you. So I have the task of being your host of the day and the unhappy task of keeping all the panelists on time, etc. So we'll have somebody in the back, sharing the times with you and making sure we go through the day. But allow me to introduce the first panel of the day and welcome the panelists up here. Just to provide you a little bit background on the panels as we transition through one topic to another through the day, I want to say a few things. Based on Mark's suggestions, in recognition of the European vision and policy commitment towards enabling the future technologies, such as 5G and IoT, this panel, the first panel of the day, will focus on the business challenges for realizing this vision. Specifically the role of technology standards and licensing models that would enable industries that are reliant on these future technologies and standards, including small and medium enterprises, startups, and new businesses. So for that discussion, we have a great set of panelists who come from the trenches of dealing with businesses and licensing issues, and those with an eye towards policy for this opening discussion. Please join me in welcoming the panelists. I'll keep the introduction short for this and throughout the day. The detailed information is in your brochures. Moderating the panel is Richard Berry, who is a partner at Bird & Bird based in the UK. And the panelists are Eva Hakaronta, Head of Licensing at Nokia, Patrick McCutcheon, Policy Officer at the DG for Research and Innovation at the European Commission, Luke McLeroy, who is the Vice President of Business Development at Avanci, a licensing platform that has been created for enabling wireless connected devices and Internet of Things. Didier Petry, he's the General Manager of France Brevet, which is one of the first sovereign investment funds dedicated to licensing of patents to mobilize human and financial resources for innovation. And Matthias Schneider, who is the Senior Licensing Manager at Audi, the automaker. Everybody knows Audi cars. Welcome, all of you. Over to you, Richard. Thank you.
Thank you, Gertie. So, good morning. I don't know if my microphone is working.
Yeah, you're good.
Very good. In the 2000s, we saw the coming together of two different industries. I don't know if you remember the 2000s, that's when you had a BlackBerry in your hand instead of an iPhone. And we saw the coming together of the traditional mobile phone industries, with their very heavy European flavour, and the consumer electronics companies and the computer makers from the United States. And for the first time, we started to see a significant split between the holders of the patents for wireless technologies and the implementers, the creators of the products. Now that's all settled down, relatively, but we're starting to see a convergence happening again, a new convergence, a new range of companies starting to use wireless technologies and coming into the industry with new products and new services. Those new entrants, those new companies, are companies with very little background in the traditional wireless industry, no background in the traditional cellular technologies. They're engineering companies, they're aerospace companies, they're automotive manufacturers. And this is the industry panel at this event. We've got representatives of industry, we've got licensors, we've got licensees, we've got some who are both, and we have a regulator. So this panel is to discuss how policy can be used and how it can be shaped to promote innovation, and whether the policymakers should get involved in the licensing debates, and if so, by how much. So I'm going to introduce, in the order in which they're seated, first of all, Eva Hakaronta, who is Head of Licensing for Nokia. She's been at Nokia since 2006. Nokia needs very little introduction. It's one of the leaders of mobile networking. It's rolling out 4G and 5G technologies across the globe. It's invested more than 100 billion in developing mobile telecommunications over the last 20 years. The Nokia Group's also got one of the largest patent portfolios, and Eva has been at the centre of billion-dollar licensing deals. Oh, that's louder. And also at the centre of the discussions with the regulators coming out of the mergers and demergers that Nokia has recently been through. So she's been very much involved in this process. Second, Patrick McCutcheon is a policy officer at the DG for Research and Innovation at the European Commission. Now, Patrick, like all the best of us, started out life as a chemist and was originally a forensic scientist. So if at the end of this panel there's some blood on the carpet, he can tell us who did it. Luke McElroy is an intellectual property lawyer with Avanci, a company that I'm sure he's going to tell us an awful lot about. Now, like all the best IP lawyers, he also started out as a scientist and then went on to McCool Smith, which is the patent litigation firm in Texas, before joining Ericsson. And he's now gone on to Avanci. Too young, too good-looking, too smooth. Luke is the guy who, after my wife met him for the first time, she stopped saying that all intellectual property lawyers were boring. Didier Patry is the Director General and CEO of France Brevet. That's an investment fund dedicated to international patent licensing. France Brevet is one of the first of the sovereign investment funds with an initial funding of 100 million being deployed by a team of international experts to build a strategic patent position and monetize them. And finally, Matthias Schneider from patent licensing from Audi AG. For most English people, the only German we can speak is Vorsprung durch Technik, the Audi advertising slogan that we all grew up listening to. Now, for Audi, the Technik today is the connected car technologies. Audi Connect is bringing news, weather and traffic information to Audi drivers at 4G or LTE speeds. It's got emergency call functions, online roadside assistance, and Audi is pioneering research into piloted driving, using wireless connected technologies between their cars. So Audi is at the very center of this. It's one of these companies that's coming into the industry using wireless connectivity technology for the first time, and is disrupting the traditional licensing model. So Matthias, I expect, is going to be somewhat active on this panel and explaining to us why what we have been doing in the wireless industry for so many years may have to change, and others may be debating. So I'd now like to hand over to each of them to give their introductions. Would you like to start, Ava?
Why not? So I guess no need to have a long speech after these introductions. However, I guess one of the sort of key things that I would like to point out is that Nokia has been on both sides, so both the licensee and the licensor, for a very long time. So none of these questions that we are asking with 5G are actually new. All of the questions have been asked in previous iterations, and usually they have found answers when both sides have discussed and engaged in a dialogue. I think one of the problems that we see in the market today is a tendency of both sides to enter more into a dialogue with regulators than one another. So I think since I am the person who sits on the airplanes, I just got back from San Francisco. Before that, I was in Hong Kong. I'm heading to India at the end of the week. I think I'd really like to encourage both sides to engage in a dialogue with one another. And in fact, that dialogue is very actively ongoing as we speak. So balance, I think, is my thesis. We need a balance. Inventors need to be fairly rewarded. Otherwise, we will not have investments going into open standards. We'll have a lot of proprietary standards instead, and proprietary technologies. On the other hand, we need access to technologies so that implementers can implement the technologies and the market will take off. And I don't think there is a way to regulate oneself to this point. I think it is an active dialogue between market participants. And finally, I think my experience of deal making over the past 25 years tells me that whenever there is a willingness to resolve things between two parties, they will get resolved. But I guess the problem more than anything else can be an unwillingness.
Thank you.
Patrick, would you like to tell us the perspective of the regulator?
Thank you, Richard. I should first say that I'm not strictly speaking the regulator, because that would be our colleagues on the antitrust side. But perhaps broadly, as the first speaker from the Commission, I would indicate this is interesting timing for an event, as we're working on a policy statement on standard essential patents, the details of which I can't really discuss today. But perhaps a little bit about the department I come from. Research and innovation is the part of the Commission that funds and finances research and innovation and promotes private investment. And as a result, we want to see those who invest get a reasonable return on their investment. We also want to see diffusion of technology, and we want to see the standard system preserved and extended. The particular technologies are those that are funded by DG Connect, and you'll hear later from Emilio. We have a particular concern also for SMEs, noting the amount of litigation in this area and indeed others, and suggestions at times that we don't want the patent market clogged up with invalid patents or patents of dubious validity. The concern we have is that there are calls for litigation to the death, and if we go down that road, the death will be of the SME, regardless of which side of the market they're on. Looking to the future, conscious of the development of 5G, we see a need for a new model of licensing, but we want to see that there's a balance struck between the interests of both sides, that we get a practical and fair definition of what fair and reasonable is and what amounts really to non-discriminatory. I think I'll leave it at that, Richard.
Thank you. Luke.
Hello, and Richard, thanks for the introduction, but we're not doing a good job of managing expectations for my contribution today. I'm a little intimidated. I guess, like you said, I'm part of a patent licensing platform for the last year now that is focused exclusively on licensing standard essential patents to the Internet of Things. And for just a couple of opening thoughts, I'd like to share two observations, two things that have really hit home with me as we've started this process. The first is that, you mentioned with the smartphone situation from the 2000s, it was two industries coming together with different traditions. And the Internet of Things, it is many, many industries coming together with much, much different IP traditions. It's actually surprising because for the most part, we all operate under the same IP laws, the same patent laws, but the systems, the licensing approaches, the practices for sharing technology with your competitor or not sharing technology with your competitors vary dramatically from one industry to the next. And for IoT licensing to be efficient, to be streamlined, to not be a burden for the SMEs, really what we're going to have to find is common ground that all of these different industries can get on board with, common ground that reflects everybody's viewpoints. And to me, maybe this is echoing Ava's comments a little bit, the thing that we can't do is just say, this is the way we've always done it in telecom. This is the way we've always done it in the auto industry. You have to adapt to what we do, because that's going to lead to disputes. That's going to lead to friction. That's going to keep us from having a smooth and growing and thriving IoT. So that's point one. Point two, I'd also like to mention is there's not going to be a one-size-fits-all licensing approach that works for every aspect of the IoT. The IoT is really big. It's going to be really diverse. You're going to have multiple industries, but also multiple technologies that need to be licensed. You're going to have each of these companies with a different supply chain and different IP traditions. And it's there's not going to be, just because maybe you solve a way to license cellular standard essential patents from the telecom industry towards the auto industry, towards Matthias down at the end of the table, whatever solution works there isn't going to be the same one that works when you're licensing cloud computing technology to the agricultural industry, right? They're going to have different traditions, different supply chains, different circumstances to take account for. So there's not going to be a one-size-fits-all solution for licensing in the IoT. Thanks.
Thank you, Luke. Didier, would you like to follow on?
Yes, thank you, Richard. So maybe a few words perhaps of caution when we tend to mix up or put together 5G and IoT. I think IoT is going to be here in a few years, right? It's going to be pretty fast. 5G, I'm not sure. We still have to make a lot of efforts. So the road is still going to be pretty long before we see something coming up on the market. But when it comes to IoT, we're working with a large German manufacturer of electrical appliances, and those guys said to us that in 5 years from now, all of their products are going to be connected, right? So it's going to be big. I was at the car show, the Paris car show last year, and although people were happy to see Audi, BMW, Mercedes, the big, nice, good-looking cars, the excitement was at Tesla, right? And the choice is not on the diesel engine. The choice is, in fact, because it's fully connected, because it's a computer, right? That's what people want. So this is coming up. This is going to be here. You're going to buy a fridge because it's connected. You're going to buy a car because it's connected. So it's the chip that will make the difference, right? The connection is going to be something absolutely massive. So it's a choice. We work with SMEs. We work with startups to try to help those guys build up strong patent portfolios and then put themselves in a good position to get some funds to be able to resist and actually to survive and to go to the next step. What we see is they have at the moment, and I'm talking about startups and SMEs, they have absolutely no appetite, no willingness to license their IP. It's not their business model. So if you want to pull those guys into the bucket, if you want to pull those guys into the game, and we're going to need them because they are supposed to be the disruptors. They're supposed to be the big innovators. We are going to have to make the standard system very attractive. And at the moment, it does not look attractive. At the moment, it looks pretty disappointing, I've got to say. It's extremely difficult for a small company to have a say in a standard setting organization. And on top of it, the reward is absolutely uncertain from a finance point of view. So the incentive is not there, right, for startups and SMEs altogether. So for us, that's a big deal because I think in terms of policies, in terms of perhaps what EU institutions should do, two things, and that's what we're supposed to talk about today, right? First, put the flag on the ground, which is we strongly believe in open innovation. Innovation meaning that we share our technology. We believe in IP, but we want to share it. We want consumers to have access to technology, right? It should not be kept only private, only proprietary. So we believe in IP, but IP that is licensed out to the world. And to be licensed out to the world, you need incentives. You need incentives for people, you need incentives for institutions. People need to get a reward. Without any reward, they won't make the efforts. They will keep it for themselves. And then you create a mess, because at some point, consumers will pay the price. The transaction costs are going to increase, and then products prices are going to increase. So that's not good, right? So we have to make specific efforts. We have to keep the FRAND system alive. I mean, fair, reasonable, and non-discriminatory. We have to keep it alive, and we have to make sure it works, right? And we have to make sure it's fair for everyone. So that is pretty key. So in terms of policy, in terms of policy making, these are the two flags that we have to put in Europe. We are innovators. We believe in IP. We believe in standards. We believe in sharing. We believe in open innovation. And we want to do absolutely everything against platforms that can abuse, in fact, their dominant position. That's my words today.
And Matthias.
Okay, let me start with a side comment to Didier. Maybe when preparing your speech, you should have looked at the current FAA in Frankfurt, where Audi has shown the i-Ron and the new A8, which makes Tesla pale. And another side point, the main difference between car companies like Audi or Mercedes or BMW and Tesla is that we actually earn money with our cars. That's a challenge, believe me, but we managed that challenge. Tesla has so far not sold a single car where they earned a dime. I mean, they lost money with every single car that they sold. So yes, grading technology is difficult and it costs money, but at some point in time you have to get over the hurdle, you know. When I prepared for this panel, I was asked to make maximum of 3 starting statements, and I looked at the text there, and it was talking about the vision of technologies. You know, our former Prime Minister Schmidt said at one point, if you have visions, you ought to see a doctor. I don't know what a vision of a technology is, but when I look at 5G, my feeling always is that it's so far a partially defined solution urgently looking for a problem. And that is a real difficulty that I see with the question, when will 5G become a success? One of the issues, that's my second point, is that I believe that the standardization process to define 5G has somewhat fallen apart. It has changed from the standardization process that we used to define 4G. Because what happened since then is that everyone who is an implementer has left that standardization process. That's the reason why, for example, the 5GAA was created, because the people who build or who define the standards, the communication standards, don't know what the implementers need. So there's a disconnect there. And that disconnect leads to another disconnect that you see in the licensing processes. I mean, if you want to do efficient licensing, and believe me, everyone in our industry understands that those who invent technology and to build up technology and infrastructure have the right to get a fair reward what they are doing. But if you want to define what that fair reward is and where and how to create a working licensing model, you need educated and informed partners on both sides. And if the implementers do not know what they are using, and the technology providers do not know how their technology is used, licensing becomes very difficult. I mean, Luke, the two of us, we have discussed this topic over and over again. I mean, where is the right level to start licensing? How can a car company like Audi, yes, we have 3 or 4 experts that know what 4G, for example, really is, but it's not a big number of people. How can we organize a licensing process in that environment? Are we the right people to talk to? Is it someone else? That is my main question that I would, or one of the important questions that I would like to discuss here. Is it really in the Internet of Things? Communication is only one small part of what we need. Is it really the OEMs, the sensor or is it the sensor manufacturers, is it the module manufacturers who should do that licensing negotiations? I mean, frankly speaking, personally, I'm happy to do it, but very often I think I'm just not the right partner.
Interesting statement that the implementers have left the standardization organizations, and as a result, the standards are not necessarily being developed in the direction that the market needs. Is it that the implementers have left, or is it that they haven't joined? For a long time, there used to be a complaint that the new guys in the telecoms market were not getting involved in the SSOs and were happy to use the technology without contributing. Is that what is happening here, or is that there is actively people leaving?
I mean, one part is clearly the market that has changed. You know, once upon a time when I was still working for Nokia, we sold phones. Right now they are doing mostly infrastructure and technology development in an area where there is not a big market. So I would still call them, Nokia, for example, a company that has a little bit of this implementer's understanding, but it has certainly decreased from the time when they built mobile phones. The other issue really is that when it was only mobile phones, it was not that difficult. I mean, in the opening speech, it was said that we look at our cellular phone for the first time, but it's no longer the cellular phone. It is a sensor somewhere out in the field looking at how fast your corn grows, which will send a message to a farmer. And the farmer has a computer to organize the farm. It's not a smartphone technology. It's a fridge, it's a car, a submarine, a plane. What do I know? I mean, all these devices suddenly need communication. And you can't expect the manufacturer of an airplane or of a car to be an active participant in a communication standardization process. Because we don't know about that. We don't want to know about that. Our expertise is to build good cars. Our expertise is not to know how to do a channel selection in 4G.
No, but how could we, or how could the regulatory environment encourage the customers of the technology, the car manufacturers, the aerospace manufacturers, to get more involved and provide at least some understanding of their needs in steering the direction? What is it that would persuade Audi to go along to the SSOs and say, this is interesting, but we don't need that, we need this?
I mean, we have been one of the founding partners of the 5G AA, which is a research and development organization, a group of companies who have decided that we need to bridge this gap. We need to get the requirements of the automotive industry into the communication standardization process. So we don't know how to do that, and the communication companies don't know what to do. And we need to bridge that gap somehow. We have that group. Whether or not it's successful remains to be seen. It's only a year old, or 1.25 years old. So whether there is success, it's open. But it's very clear to me, if we do not fully understand what the requirements of the different Internet of Things application areas are, it will be very difficult for 5G because there are competitors. We have 802.11p, for example. Not that I personally like it very much, but let's face it, it is a competition, and the fight on who will win is going on. So it should also be an interest of the cellular communication industry to truly understand what the needs of, for example, the car industry are.
Luke, Avanci is active in connected cars at the moment and represents many of the largest of the patent owners in the area, and is also represents many of the largest standard-setting organisation participants in the area. Do you have any role in the interface in standard setting and the liaison between the two, or are you purely a licensing organisation?
We are purely focused on the licensing issues. So the role of Avanci is to bring together standard essential patents into a one-stop licensing solution for the auto industry, for utility industry, for every other part of the IoT that is going to bring in cellular communication into their products. And you know, Matthias, I think I completely agree with you on some of the aspects of 5G development. You know, the competition from non-standardized technologies is real. You know, there's you know, I think in an effort to adapt to the needs of the massive IoT, you know, the millions and millions of connected devices that just have minimal connectivity requirements. There's new cellular solutions coming out, narrowband IoT, Cat-M, some others which see real competition from proprietary technologies. Sigfox, LoRa, are all proprietary solutions that address that same low power, wide area need, and it will be, I think, something that keeps competition, standards bodies on their toes to develop the best and the most efficient solution for those market needs. And maybe, you know, one last thing, Matthias, I'm not sure I've seen the same disconnect between who's building the standards and who's implementing the standards. You know, as we, of course, are tracking that landscape, you know, we see the top, you know, 2 of the top 3 handset companies are also some of the top contributors at 3GPP. I think probably all 3 of the top infrastructure companies are there. The top component company is there, in a very small group that's doing a lot of the standardization. So we see a lot of overlap still between companies developing the standards and those that are implementing it in products.
There was a lag, though, in the cell phone industry. There was a lag between the new implementers and then becoming very active in SSOs. Is it just that we're seeing the same lag here as the new industries collide?
You know, that's a good observation. No, I think you're right. In a lot of cases, not everyone. I mean, there's notable examples of companies that have become very successful in the smartphone industry and still have not joined the standardization body. But you're right. A lot of times it's the market success that then leads to participation on the standardization for the next generation.
Patrick, is there anything that the Commission can be doing to try and close that gap, close the lag, encourage the manufacturers who are interested in the technology to become more involved at an earlier stage?
I'm not sure that that's the space that we can act in. What we can do, and we are also, and also for another reason, we're trying to look at the issue of valuation of technology rating, the valuation of intangibles. Part of that is because we want to see companies who are rich in intangibles have access to finance. As regards the participation in the standard setting, I think it might be better put that question to Emilio in the next session. I'm not really involved in standard setting.
No, thank you. You raised the question of valuation and your role in that. Can you tell us a little more about that, how the work that is being done in that area?
Well, this is a thorny issue in that there is no inherent value to a technology. It's only when a technology is used in a particular application and there's a clear understanding of the size of the product market and the pricing that you can somehow come to valuation. And then we're looking at the idea of, well, some form of intellectual balance sheets, intangible assets on balance sheets. We have the situation where such assets are recognized in the case of a merger. When you acquire the assets, you put them on the balance sheet, but for tax reasons, if you generate them yourself, they're not. And equally, there's a skeptical view on the value, in that there's a concern that all you're looking at is the fire sale value of assets that financial institutions don't understand. They struggle with real estate, so they're bound to struggle with something that's more intangible. So we're trying to, in this context of the gap between licensors and licensees, or financiers, or those looking for finance, to bring together some understanding of how each side is valuing the technology. We don't expect to see one particular tool emerge. We're looking more at a toolbox and getting some kind of consensus on the methodology, more an approach to the valuation.
And the idea of this is to help SMEs, well, European SMEs at least, secure funding and move themselves through the growth phase, which is something that Silicon Valley is very, very good at and we are very bad at. Is that my understanding?
That is the particular aim of the department I'm working in, but of course the tools, once they're developed, can perhaps be useful in other contexts, because ultimately the range of reasonableness has to be based on some form of valuation.
So do you envisage this being used as to standardize or to help assist in licensing in the commercial sphere?
I think it's more the latter. I'd be leery of referring to a standard. We might get a broad approach, but different tools will be used within that, and get a recognition of the utility or the advantages and drawbacks of different tools.
Okay. Didier, do you think that there should be more common understanding or more standardized behavior in the licensing world, or do you think it should be left to the commercial organizations to work this out as they go along?
That's a good question, actually. I think as was said before, if we want to improve the situation, if we want to make the situation a bit more fluid, if we want transactions to occur and to happen nicely, I think first we have to put a system together to open up the dialogue, right? We should have a common place where we can speak, we can exchange information. There's no interest, and I think there's no benefits in keeping some transactions as a black box. That's no good for anyone, actually. So we should foster dialogue, we should increase transparency. I don't have a magic recipe yet for this, and I'm not too sure if that's something that should be regulated. But in a way, perhaps the regulator should help, putting more transparency on the table, at least setting up a tool or a place where information can be exchanged and we go a bit faster when we need to close a deal, for instance, when we need information on previous deals. So somehow, as it is always the case in Europe, we need to strike a balance. But I'm not completely in favor of keeping it to the commercial forces, which may be antagonistic and pretty violent and may lead to nowhere, to, on the other hand, having strict regulations on the matter. I think it's something in between, fostering communication, transparency platforms which help licensors and licensees to communicate. That would be key, so to speak. So maybe not something which, if we want to design a system, not a system that is legally compulsory or one-way street, but which is a place where you are invited to go and you can go if you want to discuss issues. So I would see it that way.
And when you mean transparency, do you mean financial transparency or transparency about licensing practices?
Perhaps both. The other issue that we've got, and we were speaking about this not too long ago, we have an issue of access to data. We don't have a lot of research in Europe on exactly deals that have been closed, in what conditions they've been closed. We have a lot of research in the field of law. If you want to know what is the status of inventive step at the European Patent Office, no doubt you have books and books and books on the matter. When it comes to the economics, that's a different story, right? We're pretty blind. I think we should, more information on the economics, on the practices would really help. It would be beneficial for everyone.
That financial information is some of the most closely guarded and confidential secrets of all. As a litigator, I'm always being assured that I have to keep that completely under seal, and we put in place all sorts of complicated mechanisms to prevent it from becoming public during the litigation. Now, Matthias and Luke and Ava are all licensing experts who have worked in this area and have worked at times protecting that information. What do you think about that, of greater transparency of rates?
I think that in bilateral licensing, the parties will always want a degree of confidentiality, and that is simply because there are no two identical parties, and there are no two identical contracts, and there are always slightly differing preferences when you have a licensing discussion. And I think in order for the market to resolve issues, there needs to be a certain amount of flexibility that the parties can have for their licensing discussion. That said, I don't think that between the participants in an industry, there is a great lack of transparency. I think it's more a myth. I think everybody who engages in licensing discussion, everybody who signs a reasonable confidentiality undertaking which protects the other party and itself will get the information. I think it's more discussion and sort of smoke in the room to talk about the lack of transparency. The people who are engaging for real, they know what we are talking about. Nokia's rates are not a great secret to anyone who has engaged in dialogue with us. I heard someone talk about that there's so much litigation. I disagree. When you look at the market, when you look at how much litigation Nokia has, currently 0 offensive litigations ongoing against anyone. What you have in the market are numerous complaints to various antitrust and other authorities, regulators, about aspects of hypothetical problems and raising a lot of concern, I think, where there not need necessarily be a lot of concern if the parties engage in a proper dialogue. I don't oppose transparency, but I do think that a mandated approach will never really be a good one. And I hear a lot of talk about we should have more pools. I don't think it's a question of having pools. I do understand that it helps if you aggregate patents and reduce the amount of transactions that an implementer has to go through to get access and to have the sort of certainty. But I don't think there is one resolution or one solution. It's just like Luke said, there will not be a one-size-fits-all resolution, and any regulator who tries to mandate such a resolution will just sort of get it terribly wrong.
You don't have to be a pool to aggregate. There are companies
Exactly.
that aggregate as well.
Yes, the companies aggregate, and if you look at, for instance, Nokia, we have a very, very big patent portfolio, and you just need to do one transaction to get access to it.
Luke?
Sure. So I'd like to follow on to what Eva said, that in the bilateral, the world of telecom patent licenses, I wholeheartedly agree. There are many very legitimate reasons why those agreements end up confidential. I mean, there's oftentimes future business plans and other things that you can infer from the agreement, and it just makes it hard to share with the whole world. But I do feel like there's a drawback to that confidentiality, is that when you are signing your next license agreement, there is some skepticism that the licensee is concerned they may not be getting the best deal, that their competitor may have just signed an agreement with slightly more favorable terms that does give them a little bit of an advantage in the market. And so when we get to the IoT, I actually think it's a great opportunity for more transparency, for a couple of reasons. One, we in many ways have a clean slate, and we can do things differently than that's done before. But secondly, I think you're going to see in the IoT much more, the opportunity to have much more standardized licensing, because they aren't cross licenses between competitors, but instead companies in one industry licensing their technology, sharing it with another industry. And so I think it does give you opportunity to do new things, to start something with more transparency. At the end of the day, maybe Matthias has a comment on this. I'm guessing it's certainly important to Audi to pay a low price for any license it takes and pay a fair price. But I bet it's equally or more important that BMW pays the same price and that they're not getting a worse deal than BMW.
I mean, our problem is not BMW. Our problem are the Chinese companies that come into the market worldwide. Because there we don't have any control. I mean, with BMW, we may not talk to them because otherwise it would be a cartel, but in principle, we know what's going on in that area fairly well. But let me go back to this. There are a few interesting issues. I do not believe that mandating any licensing model will work. It wouldn't help very much. If you have got two parties who are willing to solve a licensing issue, who are really willing to do that, they can do it, period. I mean, Eva and I have done that on the same side of the table and on the other side of the table, and it worked both ways. So,
and we've kicked each other under the table.
So I believe this works, but there is this issue that there are some things that you simply cannot mandate. Let's make it very clear. I mean, never try to mandate how people should value or calculate the value of a license. The only thing that the two parties can agree is that they will disagree on their method of valuation. But there is simply no way that an implementer and a technology provider would agree on a way how a license should be valued. In the end, you have to agree on a number. And I don't care what the other side believes, how they justify that number towards their management or towards whoever. I have to justify it to my management. And if the number is right, then we can get an agreement. If the number is not right, tough luck. But do not think that something like this could be mandated. I think this is it's a dream. When you look at the 5G environment, what I believe is interesting is that contrary to 4G licensing, 5G we really could have a clean slate. where we can start from scratch. There are no past licenses. There are no issues with your supply chain. I mean, just one example. When we try to close a 4G license agreement, we have 10 to 15 suppliers who all have indemnified us. If we close that deal, in principle, the administration of this license and how to get the money back from our suppliers is left to us. So instead of for the technology providers, it's easy to do it in a way that they go to the OEM and say, we want you to you take the license and you deal with all these indemnification issues. For us, it would be much preferable if the patent owners go to our module manufacturers or head unit manufacturers and license them, because then we don't have to worry about this. And yes, Volkswagen is a big company, international company. It's the largest car manufacturing company in the world with all the administrative overhead. But it is a nightmare if Volkswagen takes a license and we have to deal with all our suppliers and trying to get the money back for the indemnifications that they've given to us. So choosing the wrong level means that you are not, it doesn't make life easier. It just moves the burden of what you need to do from the patent owners to the implementers, to the users. Not something that we can really agree to.
We don't want is the regulators to tell us how to calculate the amounts. But we also hear the cry all of the time that FRAND is uncertain. And we saw at least one SSO has tried to set out a couple of rules as to how you should go about calculating FRAND, and that hasn't met with universal approval. Where do you think the line is? Do you think the regulators should stay completely out of this? Do you think the SSO should stay completely out and let the market decide? Or do you think there should be further guidance?
I mean, I think what would be helpful and can be done is to create guidelines, to explain what people should consider. But you cannot enforce something like that. It simply won't work. I mean, if the rules, the IP policy rules, become too burdensome for the technology developers, they will just move out of that standardization organization, or they will simply refuse to sign the FRAND obligations.
Yes.
If you make it too loose, then you may be able to create a lot of, if it's it becomes too easy to extract large amounts of money from implementers, you may attract the technology providers and developers, but then you run into this issue that you get all the litigation going on because the implementers are not willing to pay that. So it's a fine line, and the question really is, can you do much more than just setting out an IP policy that says that licensing has to be under FRAND conditions and leave the definition of FRAND to the parties or to the market? This, I don't believe it really works, and there's no possibility to mandate something like this. Soft law, guidelines, that could work, and maybe the Commission comes up with something that helps us here. I'm not sure, but there's still hope.
And Luca Vanzi has on its website a large section about valuing and trying to work out how we do this. But the thing we've all been waiting for is the number, which still isn't published.
It's not, no.
No.
You're right. The getting the price right is a key aspect of making our platform a success. If the royalty is too high, then we'll never have a licensee. But of course, if the royalty is too low, we won't be able to attract all the patent owners into the platform to truly make it a one-stop solution. So from the start, we've I think learned from some lessons from other joint licensing efforts that have not succeeded, and realized we need to get input not just from patent owners, not just from potential licensees, but from both sides, and find a number that we know both sides can accept before we set the expectation that could be too high or too low. So absolutely, we haven't announced it yet and want to make sure we've received all the input we can before we fix that number.
But you're under some time pressure, aren't you? Because the industry is moving in that direction. These technologies are in use now.
Yes.
And if the discussion doesn't move fast enough, then people will get impatient and start to take actions.
I think you're absolutely right. We do see, that clean slate can only last for so long, right? Before some patent owners or some licensees feel like they have to take actions to look out for themselves rather than committing to a joint platform. But I feel good. I like the situation we're in. I think we're still at a very very good moment to get a good licensing platform in place for the IoT. And you're right, by putting information on our website, by getting that discussion started, all the meetings, all the traveling we're doing right now, we're trying to seize the opportunity.
There's the other side as well. It's not just the patent owners who might get impatient. It's the implementers who set up their businesses, they tool up, they start producing the modules, they start implementing them into the cars, and they don't at that point know the cost. Is there a point at which it's suddenly too late to build it into the business plan? The business is set up, it's working, and nobody at anywhere along the line has got it built into their cost base?
Certainly. The indemnity situation, the competition between suppliers to the end product maker is a really big factor in all of this. Automotive companies, other IoT product makers, certainly all have very smart, very competitive bidding processes before they choose a supplier. And I'm sure one of the questions in every RFP they send out is, what is your IP indemnity protection? And when that gets combined with the price discussion, it puts a lot of pressure on the suppliers to not only give indemnity, but also still keep the price as low as possible. And that limits how much they can hold back for the IP license rights that they don't have at that time. And it could create a tough situation where the customer thinks they have bought a fully indemnified, fully licensed product. But at the end of the day, the supplier has not held back the reserves to actually achieve and obtain those licenses.
And if he does, the first supplier to enter into the license has the problem that his competitors are not paying that cost.
Certainly so. And I think there are different companies, different suppliers with different strategies about how they plan to live up to those indemnity obligations. Are they going to be there? Are they really going to step in and pull in the licenses? Or are there other companies that are taking a little bit more risk there and seeing what they can get away with?
Ava, I think, had a comment, and then Matthias.
Thanks. About these supply chain issues. I think my comment is that I think every licensor is willing to listen and willing to accommodate and try to find a solution for supply chain issues like Matthias mentioned, like having a very fixed supply model in the automotive industry, which usually means that your tier one supplier is taking the licenses. And I think we are engaging in dialogue to find such a resolution. I think what is particularly concerning at the moment to me is that we are talking about the worry about worry on the implementer side and SMEs, and trying to come up with some form of a mandated license to all solution. And my concern is that that is not going to lead into a very effective market, because it will inevitably split the licenses and lead into far more transactions being required for the end product manufacturer to cover its product with its licenses. I think that could be a tremendous mistake. What it also could mean for someone who wants to just strike one deal is that they are no longer sort of able to have that one deal, because so many of their supply chains parts have sort of secured partial licenses somewhere along the line. So instead of getting all of that transparency, I think we might risk losing a lot of transparency. So I think, solutions like this could be big mistakes. And I think I'm just going back to my message that where there are two parties to a dialogue that are willing to resolve the issues, they will get resolved. But as somebody alluded to, I don't think anybody quite understands what 5G is. And I don't think we even have all the sort of problem statements at the moment ready. And before we have the problem statements, we can't really have the thesis for the solutions. And I think the market needs some time to develop those solutions, and it will develop those solutions.
The problem really is that you can't wait too long. I mean, if you look at a situation like the Avanci model, with the currently 10 or so companies delivering patents, you inevitably have suppliers who have licenses to a partial portfolio of what Avanci offers. And obviously, when we sign the deal, or if we were to sign the deal with Avanci, and we go to our suppliers and say, now you have to cover the cost, they come back and say, but why should we pay? We have already the license to those patents. Why are you so stupid to pay for that again? And they leave that to us. I'm not saying that that cannot be solved. I believe there are solutions that work quite well. But the problem really is, or the point is, we have the advantage at the moment that for 5G we could create something where that problem doesn't show up. If you wait for 4 years, then you are in exactly the same situation, and the entire discussion that we are currently having with 3G, with 4G, and even with 3G, will come up again. So there is a chance right now, and the question really is, can we find some rules without setting everything in concrete already? Can we find some rules that make it easier? Because, the Avanci model is great, but you have tens of thousands of SMEs in the end in the Internet of Things that all need that license. You can't get them together. I mean, even if only the 5 car manufacturers, the big car manufacturers, would go together and say, we want to negotiate together with Avanci, believe me, we would immediately be accused of having a cartel, and we can't do that. So the issue really is, if you find the right rules before you have too many implementations, you may solve many issues that will inevitably come up when there are licenses in place.
I should, just before Luke says, I should say, by the way, to the audience, please, if you have questions or if you have comments, please do intervene as well. I know it's the first session and everybody hasn't had their coffee break yet, but we would like to hear from everybody. Luke, please carry on.
So two responses back to Matthias. First of all, you are 100% right that now is the time to be thinking about 5G before those other agreements start locking you into a certain path. Now is the time to think big picture about what we can do, what could be best for 5G. And at Avanci, this is actually a pretty appropriate setup. We often get the feeling that we're pulled in both directions by patent owners on one side, by licensees on the other. On this level, this question of what's the right level for the license. And you hear from, Matthias has said very well, our supplier knows the technology better. They know the licenses and the prices. And we have these existing relationships that have been in place for years and years. Come on, make it easier. Let's have licenses that fit into our environment. And of course, patent owners on the other side have been doing it a certain way for a long time. They feel that sometimes the suppliers haven't held back the right reserves to pay for the license fees, and they see issues about like Patrick said, to get the right price for the right product. Maybe you do need to go to the end product level, and they have concerns about grant back licenses. To negotiate that those divergent views at Avanci, we really try to look at what's the most efficient solution for a particular situation. Because we think the most efficient solution is going to lead to the lowest cost of a license. And so we've started looking at new things. Some products, cars in particular, may have 2 or 3 modules within the same car, and especially as we get more into autonomous driving. And you can offer a cheaper license by paying one license fee for the whole car, rather than a separate license fee every time there's a supplier. There's also the matter of, figuring out who needs a license and tracking the license. And obviously, the end product brand is more visible than the what components may be buried inside. And no two supply chains are created the same way. Within the automotive industry, which we've been talking about a lot, sometimes you see a situation where there's a chip that goes into a module that goes into the car, but sometimes a chip goes into a telematic control unit that goes into the car without a module. And if you want to find a consistent level to license each product once, and only once, you don't have all that many options. So it's a really difficult question. I think there are very legitimate concerns on both sides. And when we're looking at licenses in place, you have to hear all of these viewpoints and figure out how can we get it done. And that's the I think the big question we should all focus on. It is.
Yeah, I would like to comment on this once again, and then I'll stop. I think there is a big chance there. I fully agree that for 5G we should consider licensing, for example, on the car level, because that would allow the technology providers, the implementers, to use a multitude of small 5G modules in their car, which would be a huge advantage when you think about being in competition with 802.11p, for example. Because if you think about a 15-meter mobile home, you probably need a few more modules to look at the back of the car and the front of the car and all these things. It might make sense to have more of these modules. If the licensing cost doesn't grow with this, that works. And if we think about 5G, the car industry can think about kind of reversing this, say, we just want your modules cheaper and we take the license. But we don't have that indemnification obligation from 2014 that you have to fulfill, because it's new, it's brand new. So let's take that chance and try to come up with the model that works for 5G, that may be different from what we are trying to do by simply imposing the smartphone licensing model onto the car industry, which obviously does not work, as at least the two of us have understood very clearly.
We have a question over here.
Thank you. I have two quick questions related to the suggestion about soft law, or sort of templates for STO policies. One, as the panelists, are any of you concerned at all about sort of government unduly influencing or sort of putting a thumb on the scale? Particularly, China and other agencies are watching the EU, and so, would the effect of a policy there be really a suggestion, or would it be viewed as sort of requirement? And the second question is there anything that we can learn from the economics of the costs and benefits of uniform rules? There's a literature on this about balancing flexibility and experimentation and innovation and differences within organizations, and sort of, whether the question of whether government can keep up in dynamic industries to really suggest the right policy.
Your first question really deals with how you think about a functioning market. If you distrust the markets, then regulation may be the necessary solution. My personal feeling, and I'm not saying that's the Audi opinion, that's now the Matthias Schneider opinion, is we should leave these things to the markets. We should keep the market as liberal as possible and let them solve that. I do not trust the intelligence of a politician to find out what the right royalty rate for a 4G module is. I don't know how they should find that out. I don't think they have the expertise. I don't think they talk to the right people to get that expertise. So why not leave it to those who build the products and to those who use the products, instead of having some governmental organization do that? I think, it's just counter to my personal opinions. I don't like that idea at all.
Sorry. I tend to agree, and I do think that I have some concern about the regulators in the developed markets stepping in and trying to understand what is quite complex, and what the parties in the market probably need quite some flexibility to maneuver in. And particularly to your question about the regulators in China and in the Asian markets closely following what's happening in Europe and in the US. I've had a lot of exposure lately, let's just put it that way, to how that works. And I think if I wanted to task the regulators, for instance, in Europe with something, rather than task them with trying to resolve how the market participants should resolve these technological issues and these valuation issues, I would really task them to engage in a dialogue with the regulators in Asia and in other countries to try and provide for a level playing field globally. Like Matthias said, the concern for the German auto industry are the Chinese manufacturers. Similarly, I think the regulatory environment and the culture is a bit different in many Asian markets. Not all of them, but there are big parts of the market where I think it's still possible for parties to perhaps influence regulators to interfere in something which is more of a bilateral relationship. And I think this is something that the regulatory side should really tackle. And I really agree with Matthias that we should try to trust the market to find the solutions that it needs. And when it comes to the fear of excessive litigation, for instance, with SMEs, I doubt whether it's fully grounded. I don't think anybody lightly engages in costly litigation unless they really have the business case to back it up. And it has to be a quite large actor, to do so. So I'm just sort of agreeing with Matthias on this topic.
It's difficult to add to that as I'm at the receiving end, but I think what we offer at the present time is guidance in the form of the horizontal guidelines. My expectation is that we will not go beyond that form of policy statement. While I have the floor, I'm interested to hear the common concern of Matthias and Eva about licensing at several levels in the value chain. And that is something we might have to address. If licensing to all means licensing to all levels, or it means licensing rather to any level, then the actual determination of the level, how should that be determined? As regards the concerns of Eva regarding Asia, I'd be happy to introduce you to my colleague Pedro, who is certainly very aware of these issues and will be happy to tell you what our trade colleagues are doing in this space.
Do you think there is a solution to the problem of licensing at levels? If we look, for example, at the copyright world, it is a complete mess, and I cannot count the number of times I have paid the Eagles royalties on the Hotel California album, but it's certainly more than I have needed to. Now, that's what happens when you have a variety of licensing models and no common understanding, as there has been historically in the cellular industry. Do you think it's possible to solve this?
With respect, I think the markets are considerably different. You have far more title holders in copyright, and you have the only way royalties can be paid is through collection agencies. Now, I guess technology is such that you can actually fractionate, you can actually capture what is being played and ensure that the title holders get their revenue. The concern I have is that up to now the large flow of revenue is to the agencies that are collecting the royalties, and it's a very crude distribution of revenue. I think in this space the holders will be fewer, the users might be many. So I wouldn't push the parallel too far.
Didi, do you have any closing words you would like to end on?
Well, the point is you enjoy Hotel California, so if you pay several times, it's okay. You know, it's the size of the enjoyment, right? It's not a big issue in the end.
We should pay less for bad music, Alex.
That's the point. Perhaps, you know, I think it sounds like we'll agree. We don't want to have a mandate or something that is very solid or in the law when it comes to agreeing on price. It's not the right practice. However, still, we're coming back to the same thing. We need to talk, right? We need a dialogue. And that's that dialogue that will make licensors and licensees. And sometimes, don't forget, you can be a licensor and next day you are a licensee. And when you are a licensee, next day you are a licensor, right? You can be on both sides of the game. And we see both, actually. So increasing dialogue could be usually beneficial. Nothing mandatory, but a place where we can speak and talk like the ancient Greeks would be useful, like this one.
Thank you. Well, that concludes our panel for this morning, and we have coffee break, so thank you very much.